My name is Maddie Reyes. I'm 28 years old, and the moment I knew something was wrong, I was standing at a teller counter in a beige carpeted bank branch, holding a printout I didn't understand. The teller, a young guy with a lanyard that said trainee, kept glancing between me and his screen, like he wasn't sure whether to keep talking. "So the available credit on this line is $41, he said. I laughed, because it sounded like a joke. "There's a mistake," I said. "The limit's 15,000. I've barely touched it." He turned the monitor toward me so I could see for myself. 6 weeks of transactions. A boat marina in Ocean Shores. A restaurant supply company. 2 cash advances of $2,000 each. None of it mine. My name was on the account. My father's name was on the account too, as a cosigner, exactly the way we'd planned it 8 months earlier when my credit wasn't strong enough to qualify a loan. I remember the exact sentence that came out of my mouth, flat and quiet, because the teller actually stopped typing when I said it. My dad doesn't have a boat. I want to back up, because you need to understand what reasonable looked like in my family before you understand why none of us saw this coming, or why, if I'm honest, some of us should have. But first, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket while I was still standing at that counter, and when I looked down, I saw a text from a number I didn't recognize with a 360 area code. It said, "Tell your father we need the rest of the deposit by Friday, or we're pulling the boat back." Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? I'm curious how far this story will travel. I grew up the fixer in my family, which is a role nobody assigns you on purpose. It just calcifies over years of being the one who answers the phone. My dad, Frank Reyes, is 59, runs a small landscaping business that's been about to turn a corner for as long as I can remember, and has a way of making every ask sound like an opportunity he's generously extending to you. He has never once in my adult life asked for money. He asks for help, which is a different word with the same math. My mom, Denise, is the translator for his moods. If he's stressed, she tells you it's because he loves this family so much, and if he's short with you, she tells you that's just how men his age process pressure. My older sister Claire, 31, has spent her whole life being the one who gets to be soft, because I was always the one who could handle things. Claire doesn't lie for Dad exactly. She just goes quiet at the exact moment a lie needs room to breathe. Here's the pattern, and I want to be specific, because I spent a long time gaslighting myself out of seeing it. In March of last year, Dad borrowed my work laptop bag with my company credit card zipped in a side pocket to run one errand, and I found $400 in gas station purchases on it 3 days later. He said the truck needed work, and I believed him, because I hadn't yet learned to check. In August, during my grandmother's hospice stay, Dad was appointed to manage her small checking account so the hospital bills go smoothly, and when she passed in October, there was a $2,000 withdrawal marked MISC that nobody in the family wanted to bring up at the funeral, so nobody did. In January of this year, he asked to be added as an authorized user on my store credit card, just for emergencies, in case something happens to the truck on a job, and within a month, there were 2 charges at a hunting supply store I never mentioned to anyone because they were small enough to absorb quietly. And then, 8 months ago, when my credit score wasn't quite high enough to qualify a loan for a personal line of credit I needed to cover a move and a used car, Dad offered to cosign. He said it like a gift. "Let your old man do something for you for once," he said, and I remember feeling, God help me, grateful. So when the teller turned that monitor toward me, some old, tired part of my brain wasn't even shocked. It was just finally looking directly at something it had been avoiding for years. I left the bank and didn't even make it to my car before my phone started going off like it was on fire. My mom first. "Please don't do anything before we talk. You know how your father gets." Then Claire. "Can you please not blow this up over the phone? He's already stressed about the marina thing." Then, 20 minutes later, my dad himself, and his message, had no apology in it anywhere. "I was going to pay it back before the statement even closed. You're acting like I stole from a stranger." Then my mom again, softer this time. working the angle she always works. He's been under so much pressure since the business slowed down. I think this is really about his pride, not the money. Then Claire one more time, going quiet in the exact spot where an actual boundary should have gone. I just don't think this is worth a whole family war. I called my best friend Jordan Pierce from the parking lot because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't trying to manage me. Jordan and I met in college, and she's the only person who has ever, in a decade of friendship, told me something I didn't want to hear, and made me thank her for it later. She let me talk for almost 10 minutes without interrupting, which is its own kind of gift, and when I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a second, before she said the sentence that ended up rearranging everything in my head. Maddie, this isn't help anymore. This is ownership. He didn't co-sign your loan, he annexed it. I sat with that in my car for a long time. I decided I would go to my parents' house that night and handle it the way I handle everything, calmly, clearly, like an adult having a conversation with other adults. I told myself I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for an explanation, and maybe, if I'm being fully honest, I was still hoping there was one that would make this feel like less of a betrayal and more of a misunderstanding. My dad was in the kitchen when I got there, and he started talking before I'd even taken my coat off. Before you say anything, I want you to know I've already got a plan to pay every dollar of that back. I told him I didn't want a plan yet. I wanted to understand what happened, and he sighed like I'd asked him to explain calculus. It's not that complicated. Business has been slow. A guy I know had a boat going for a steal, and boats hold their value out here, and I figured I'd flip it in the spring for a profit and put the difference right back on the line before you'd even notice. I asked him how he could possibly think I wouldn't notice a maxed-out account with my name on it. Because I was going to fix it, he said, like the intention erased the act. My mom came in from the living room at that point, already in referee mode. Can we all just breathe for a second? Nobody's accusing anybody of anything. I said, actually, I think that's exactly what I'm doing. Claire came down the stairs in the middle of it, arms crossed, doing the thing she does where she makes her face look tired instead of taking a side. Do we really have to do this tonight? He said he's sorry. My dad, to his credit or lack of it, hadn't actually said sorry yet, and I said so. He waved a hand like I was being dramatic. I said I've got a plan. What more do you want, blood? My mom jumped back in. You know your father doesn't apologize the way you want him to. That's just not who he is. Are you really going to punish him for his personality? I asked whether taking 2 cash advances without telling me was a personality trait or a decision. Nobody answered that one directly. Dad tried a different angle. You know what? I co-signed that loan so you could even get it in the first place. Without me, you don't have a car, you don't have a place. You act like I'm some villain, but where do you think that $15,000 limit even came from? My name, my credit. I have every right to that line. I told him having his name on paper didn't give him the right to spend money that was going to come due on my report, in my life, with my job on the hook for it. He got louder. Oh, so now it's about Emmy being convenient when you needed a cosigner, and a thief when I actually use what's half mine? My mom tried to soften it. Nobody's calling you a thief, honey. I said, actually, that's exactly the word for what this is. Claire finally spoke up for real, and it wasn't for me. Can you two not do this on a Tuesday? I have work in the morning. My dad turned back to me, and his voice dropped into the register he uses when he wants something to sound final. You know what your problem is? You've never had to build anything from nothing. Everything's always come easy for you, and the second I ask for a little back, suddenly I'm the enemy. I said nothing came easy. I worked for every bit of my credit, which is exactly why it mattered so much that he'd used it. He opened his mouth to fire back, and that's when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and something behind his eyes shifted. Fast, like a door closing. He stepped into the hallway to take it, and even through the wall I could hear the tone change completely. Placating, quiet, almost pleading. When he came back, his face had gone pale in a way I'd never seen on him. That was the marina, he said. They're saying I never finished the deposit. They want the rest by Friday, or they're reporting the whole thing as fraud on their end too. The word fraud, out loud in his own mouth, did something none of the rest of the conversation had managed. It made the whole thing real. 2 days later, I sat across from a woman named Ms. Whitfield, the branch manager at the bank, who had asked me to come in after I'd formally disputed the charges over the phone. She had a manila folder open in front of her, and a way of speaking that had clearly been trained into calm neutrality. "I want to walk you through what we're seeing," she said, "because once we open a dispute like this, it stops being a family matter as far as the bank is concerned. It becomes a documented case." She said that sentence and something in my chest actually loosened, because for the first time in 6 weeks, someone was looking at this exactly the way I needed someone to look at it. Not as a daughter being dramatic about her dad, but as a joint account holder reporting unauthorized use on a shared instrument. She explained that because I was the primary account holder and my father was listed as a cosigner rather than a co-borrower with independent authority, several of these transactions might qualify as unauthorized. She also, gently, told me something I hadn't considered, that if the marina transaction really was being flagged externally, the bank's fraud department might already be looking into it independently of anything I did. I left that meeting with a case number and a strange, cold clarity. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It had a file. That night I started keeping a folder of my own on my laptop, plain and boring on purpose. Screenshots of the account statements, screenshots of every guilt-laced text from my mom and Claire with timestamps intact, a photo of the printout the teller had handed me at the counter, and a note with dates going back to the credit card in January, the hospice account in October, the gas station charges in March. I wasn't building a case to destroy my father. I was building a timeline, because I had finally learned that memory alone wasn't going to protect me in a family that specialized in making memory feel unreliable. Comment what you would have done, because this question haunted me while I sat at my kitchen table at 11 at night, organizing evidence against my own dad like it was a job. Miss Whitfield asked me to come back in with my parents for a joint meeting to go over the disputed charges, since Dad was a named party on the account and the bank needed his side documented too. I almost didn't want to go. But I did, because I understood by then that avoiding the room wasn't protecting me anymore. It was just delaying the same conversation with less proof in my hands. We sat around a small conference table, me, my dad, Miss Whitfield, and a fraud specialist named Ray who'd joined by phone. Ray started plainly. "Mr. Reyes, can you walk us through the 2 cash advances on May 14th and May 21st? My dad's answer was smoother than it had been at the kitchen table, more rehearsed. "Those were for materials for a job. I was going to log them as reimbursed once the client paid me." Ray asked which client. My dad said a name. Ray asked for a job invoice matching that client and that date range. There was a pause. I'd have to look at my records," my dad said. I already knew, because I'd checked, that there was no active client by that name in his business account that month. I didn't say it yet. I let the silence sit. Miss Whitfield turned to the marina transaction next, and the deposit at Ocean Shores Marina, that was described to Maddie as a boat purchase intended for resale. "Can you confirm the total amount transferred?" My dad said a number that was $400 lower than what I'd seen on the statement. I finally spoke. "It's not that number." Everyone looked at me. I pulled out my phone and read the transaction total off my own screenshot, out loud, with the date and the confirmation code. My dad's jaw tightened. "I don't know why you're keeping receipts on me like I'm a criminal." I said I started keeping them the day I found out he'd been treating my credit like a shared bank account, without telling me it was shared. Ray asked my dad directly whether he'd informed me, prior to any of these transactions, that he intended to use the line of credit for personal expenses. My dad hesitated in a way that told the whole room the answer before he said it out loud. Not specifically each time. No." Ms. Whitfield asked whether he understood that, as cosigner rather than co-borrower, with equal authority, certain transactions may require the primary holder's documented consent, per the account agreement. My dad looked at me instead of her when he answered, like he was hoping I'd bail him out of the question the way I always had before. "I thought family didn't need paperwork between them," he said. I told him that was exactly the sentence that had cost me $15,000 of exposure on my own credit report. We didn't leave that meeting with a full resolution. Ray said the fraud review would take another 2 to 3 weeks, and that certain transactions, particularly the 2 cash advances, would likely be reversed in my favor, while the Marina transaction remained under separate review because of the Marina's own fraud complaint. It wasn't a clean win yet, but it was the first time in this entire situation that someone with actual authority had looked my father in the eye and made him answer for a number instead of a feeling. Word got out fast after that, the way it always does in a family that runs on group chats. My Aunt Rosa texted asking why I was trying to ruin your father's name over a boat, which told me exactly which version of the story had been passed around before I'd said a single word publicly. Claire posted a vague story about family loyalty when it's hardest, that wasn't subtle to anyone who knew what it was about. My mom called 2 cousins personally, framing the dispute as me overreacting to Dad borrowing a little credit, conveniently leaving out the hospice account and the cash advances entirely. So I posted one thing, just one, a cropped screenshot of the bank's dispute acknowledgement letter, no names visible except the account holder line, with a single caption, "For anyone who's heard a different version of this is the actual case number." I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't tag anyone. I posted it once and put my phone face down on the counter. For 11 minutes, nobody responded. Then my cousin Denny, who'd known my dad his whole life and had always been quietly uneasy about him, commented just, "I believe you." My Aunt Rosa texted a much different message than her first one, this time asking if I was okay. Claire's story disappeared within the hour. A former coworker of my dad's, someone I barely knew, sent me a private message saying he'd had a similar situation with a company card years ago and never told anyone until now. The narrative that had been quietly built to protect my father cracked open in less than a day, not because I tore it down, but because I simply stopped participating in the silence that had been holding it up. The weeks after moved in waves instead of scenes. 2 of the fraudulent cash advances were reversed onto my father's side of the shared liability, dropping my exposure by $4,000. My credit utilization, which had spiked hard enough to knock 40 points off my score, started slowly climbing back as the account was corrected. My father's landscaping business lost its 2 largest contracts that quarter, not because of me, but because word travels fast in small business circles too, and reliability is currency there, the same way credit is currency at a bank. The Marina, still owed the remainder of that deposit, ended up placing a formal claim against him directly, meaning the man who had always told me paperwork was beneath family now had to hire an actual attorney, a calm, unhurried man named Mr. Alvarez, to negotiate a payment plan on his own behalf, the exact kind of formal, unglamorous adult financial management he used to tease me for doing too carefully. There was a strange, quiet justice in that. The daughter who was mocked for being overly cautious with money spent that season teaching her own father, through a lawyer neither of them had wanted to need, what caution actually protects you from. 3 months later, my mom called and asked if I'd come for Sunday dinner. I almost said no. I went anyway, mostly to see where things actually stood, rather than where I hoped they stood. My dad was quieter than I'd ever seen him, and at one point, without an audience, without Claire or Mom in the room to soften it for him, he said, "I know saying sorry doesn't fix the number on that account. I'm working with Alvarez on paying back what's left. That's the only way I know how to actually show it." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't undo 8 months. But it was the first time he'd used the word sorry without wrapping a justification around it in the same breath, and I let myself notice that. Claire, on the other hand, texted me 2 weeks after that dinner asking if I could just quickly co-sign a small loan for her. Nothing like what happened with Dad. Obviously, this is different. I looked at that message for a long time. The old version of me would have said yes before I even finished reading it, because saying yes was the fastest way to keep the peace. I didn't say yes. I told her I loved her, and that I wasn't co-signing anything for anyone right now, and I didn't over-explain it or apologize for the boundary the way I used to. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, it was just, "Okay, that's fair." It wasn't warm, but it was honest, and honest was new. If you're watching this and some part of it felt uncomfortably familiar, I think I know who you might be. You might be the dependable one, the person in your family who became the answer to every problem so early that nobody, including you, ever stopped to ask if that was fair. You might be the quiet one, the person who's been absorbing small, deniable little debts for years, telling yourself each one is too small to make into a thing. Here's what I'd say to both of you. Love is not the same as unlimited access. A person can genuinely love you and still treat your resources like their communal property the second things get hard for them. Boundaries are not betrayal. They're the very thing that makes real trust possible. Because trust without limits isn't trust. It's just exposure with a nicer name. You are allowed to require proof, timelines, and honesty from the people who are supposed to love you the most. And needing those things does not make you cold. It makes you someone who finally learned the difference between being generous and being available for extraction. If someone in your life has ever treated your name, your credit, or your trust like it was theirs to spend without asking, tell me in the comments how you found out. I'll read every single one. This video is completely fictional and created only for entertainment, educational, and reflective purposes.